Culture is one of my favorite areas of international marketing, and I spend several videos trying to explain it. It amazes me how quickly we tend to forget what our own culture is, or take for granted our own culture, or our understanding of our own culture, and how it plays with others. So in this, I hope you get a chance to understand what is culture and the dimensions of how we measure culture to hopefully make great relationships and ultimately succeed in our business abroad. So our agenda will be to define culture, the elements of culture, and discuss these dimensions. What is culture? We quickly want to say, is it something between countries? Is it geographic? How is it really made up? And normally in a class I'd discuss this, but for our purposes, go right into it. Culture is this amazing total pattern of behavior that is learned and shared, and it's dynamic. It goes beyond any of our boundaries. You'll find subcultures within our own, whether it's Californians and Texans and people from Massachusetts, which exist the same way in other countries as, like when I was in Austria, West Austrians versus East Austrians, or in China with the hundreds of different languages and cultural dynamics that are at play there. A truly diverse nation, you'll see, is not just within the boundaries of a country. There are things we see in a culture, and there are a lot of things we don't see. As you see in the example of an iceberg, we see a little bit and way more we don't see. Things that we see are ethnicity, such as genetics. We know somebody who could be Japanese, or who's German, or who's Brazilian, right? And that even itself is a mold of so many different types. But there are a lot of things we also can see, such as the way people dress, the languages they speak, the dialects within that, and the amazing different types of food, the manners, behaviors, habits. You learn quickly your habits don't matter in a different country. You have to adapt to those that are around you. There are things we don't see. Religion, beliefs, how we value what's right from wrong. Family structures are different. Gender roles, gender dynamics. A little more clearly, we see that it's the things that we don't see are also those educational things. You grow up in that education system, those ideologies. Your buying habits, your economic behaviors are culturally driven, media driven. Climate affects it. These things you don't see affecting you and your own culture as well as others every day and are unique. A more appropriate definition would be culture is that it refers to the cumulative deposit of knowledge from experiences, beliefs, values, our attitudes, meanings, hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relations, the concept of the universe and our role in it, material objects and possessions, all acquired by a group of people over the course of many, many generations. Through all of their strifes and successes emerges culture. In a hierarchy of importance, or how it really matters, values, how we deem right from wrong, differs from culture to culture. And yes, there are universal values, but there are differences in between those perceptions of right from wrong. Religion is highly impacted by values and is developed by values. In Western civilization, our Christianity religion is deeply affected by Rome and Greece and Jerusalem from thousands of years of different values. Social organization, you'll see how people organize. How is it more hierarchical or is it more flat? Languages affect us. And aesthetics, how we view beauty and not just beauty in the individual, but how we like colors, how we like different landscapes. How do we view those landscapes or pictures holistically or individually? Ultimately, all those affect how we teach our children. How does it manifest? And it starts with values. We start to experience things and see how we feel about them, and see what's right from wrong. It's not unique to our own species. We find this in other species as well. Wolves won't let their pups play with other pups if that one's too rough. Over time, they get excluded from the pack. So values are innate in how we determine right from wrong, and those practices and those experiences and feelings emerge quickly, and also over time. They refine into rituals. How do we celebrate our values? And those rituals are in practice from holidays and religion and organization. And ultimately, our species loves heroes. We love stories. We want the villain and the drama and the plots to unfold, and heroes emerge. In the United States, we have the cowboy, so to speak, or the Wonder Woman or Batman and Superman. Those even include heroes. And even older than that, in Western philosophy, we have the mythological Greek gods and Homer and the Odyssey and the stories in that as well. The gods triumphing over the I forgot the name of the character, but amazing book to read. All that affects how we deem and view our values. And ultimately we get these symbols. In the United States, it's the American flag. In China, the color red. There are good ones and bad ones, unfortunately, but these are the things that we idolize and erect monuments after. So that's where symbols come from. In communication style, it is important to know early on, some cultures are low context and some are high context. What this means is some cultures like our own, we're very clear, logical, and specific. We mean what we say and we say what we mean. In other cultures, the way they say things become less important, and what the context or the nonverbal cues and the relationships that we have matter. If you aren't on the hierarchy of the Chinese relationship, they're not going to speak to you the same way. And you need to be ready for those types of cultures in which what they're saying to you and what they're trying to intend. And a whole lot revolves around that. Some cultures that are very low context would be Swiss Germans to North Americans, Scandinavians. And in the middle, we have French and English and Italians. French, there's a lot of innuendo, and English, it's a lot of politeness. And it's hard to get the truth sometimes out of the cordial formalities. In other cultures, such as Arabic and Japanese cultures, you find that context is much higher, and meaning and context matters. And so you could see that translating, for example, a language such as Arabic from Iran, what the translator has to interpret and say may be different than directly translating it word for word to ensure that we understand it. And that's an art of its own. I will share these slides so you can watch the videos. Hofstede. Who is he? Hofstede did a massive study on culture. He wanted to see if there were patterns that emerge across the board, and if he could refine that into something we could measure and analyze. Culture is, up until this point, had not really been studied in that sense, and he was the first to do it and achieve it. Unfortunately, there are some drawbacks to his research, but him and Trompenaar are the standards of cultural studies or cultural dimensions. And organizational culture, it wasn't really known at the time of his studies, and he did his study at IBM. So there could be biases inlaid into this study, so just be careful of that. Also note that dimensions do not speak for every single individual of every single culture. These are frameworks to have a starting point. And do not take the opportunity to understand somebody individually by judging them for what the cultural dimensions you had been perceived to take in. So do not take this totally at face value, and that would be wildly inappropriate. So some of the dimensions, we notice power distance. Some cultures have higher power, and some have more flat and equal rights. Individualism versus collectivism. Some are more masculine, some are more feminine. Some like risk and some don't. Some think long-term, some think short-term. Some like indulgence and some like to restrain. All these are different values in the cultures. And for the sake of time, I'll go into them a little bit quicker. Individualism, like the United States, we like to tend to value ourselves and not so much our family and our groups. These tend to be wealthier countries, surprisingly. Work ethic matters. Your individual initiative is cherished. The primacy of the individual is the value. And collectivist organizations work with groups and like consent and loyalty. So unfortunately, some cultures that are collective tend to be poorer, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. We have Japan that is higher in collectivism, but also extremely wealthy. But they base everything on seniority and not necessarily meritocracy. Masculinity versus femininity. You'll see quickly that some cultures value patriarchal systems more so than others. I try to be careful with this because I look at this more from a nature versus nurture as well, that there are more deeper rooted things than just what we see as a manly thing versus a feminine thing. And I think that's underscoring the deeper rooted things, such as the importance of nurturing family and friendly atmosphere versus recognition and achievement and wealth. Feminine cultures tend to have more importance on cooperation and group decision making. So that's what I try to take a little step further. Uncertainty. Some cultures like risk and some don't. I really implore you to understand that some cultures will value risk much better, like the United States. But if you're making a negotiation with, say, a Japanese or a Chinese group, they might value long-term relationship and want to know maybe lower risk alternatives, and you can maybe come together on those differences. Distance. This is important to note. Some cultures obey their superiority much higher than others. French culture, South Korean culture value higher power distance, that the senior makes the decision. Others want more flatter. You'll find this in the egalitarian Scandinavian countries where management decision making is shared. So do not break ranks in those cases where seniority or superiority matters. Follow the rank. Some societies have a longer perspective of time. I think it's important to note that time is different for us versus some. We like the quarterly reports. We like our quick seasons. Some companies operate on not just seasons or quarterly results. They look at time in years, decades, and make decisions based on what's going to affect them not tomorrow, but maybe 5-10 years from now. And that, with risk, to me, are some of the greatest playing ground for you to work with and negotiate successfully with different markets and see how you can help achieve great business results, but also great relationships, because you're really understanding how they operate. On that note, once again, culture is deep, it's different, and be careful about taking all these dimensions at face value and understand that culture is not just your own, it's others. And there's a lot you can glean from your own by studying other cultures. And a final note, warning, ethnocentrism is the belief of one's own culture is superior to that of others. This reduces that your way is better than others. Don't do that. Particularly, it's important when you're dealing with others that you find that their way of doing things may also work too, and you want to work around that together, and where you think might be separate ideas that come together.